invitation came in a cream envelope with my brother's name and his fiancé's initials embossed on the back in gold. Inside was the kind of cardstock that costs more per sheet than most people spend on lunch. Thick, heavy, the kind that announces itself before you even read it. And tucked behind the formal insert was a post-it note in my mother's handwriting, pressed against the RSVP card like an afterthought she decided at the last second. Nora, the venue has a strict dress code, black tie formal. I know you've been busy with the baby, so if you can't find something appropriate in time, we completely understand if you sit this one out. It's important that everything looks right for Owen and Stephanie's photos. You know how these things are. I read it twice. Then I set it down on the kitchen counter next to my daughter's sippy cup and a half-eaten piece of toast with the crusts cut off. My daughter Lily was in the living room arranging her stuffed animals in a circle on the rug with the focused seriousness of someone conducting a board meeting. I didn't cry. I wasn't even surprised. Have you ever been made to feel like the edited version of your own family, the part they crop out before the frame goes on the wall? If that's you, leave a comment below. I genuinely love to know I'm not the only one. I set the post-it face down on the counter and picked up my coffee. My mother called that evening while I was putting Lily to bed. I let it ring through. She called again at 9:30 and I picked up because she would keep going until I did. Nora, did you get the invitation? Her voice had that particular brightness she uses when she's already decided how the conversation is going to go. I did, I said. I got your note too. Oh, good. A pause. The kind where someone is deciding how much to unwrap. I just wanted to make sure you understood the situation. Owen's been so stressed about the planning and Stephanie's family is they have certain expectations. Her father is on the provincial legislature. There are going to be journalists there, photographers from a society magazine. We just want everything to be seamless. You're asking me not to come. I'm asking you to be realistic, sweetheart. You've got Lily, you're doing the single mom thing, and I know the last 2 years have been hard financially. We don't want you to feel out of place. She meant she didn't want the daughter who got pregnant at 29 and walked away from a 6-figure career to raise her child alone, standing in the background of a wedding photo in a dress that didn't fit the room. I understand, I said. And I hung up. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time after that. The room was quiet except for the sound of the white noise machine in Lily's room down the hall. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Anger felt like too much energy for something I'd been watching build for 3 years. Here is what my family thought they knew about me. I had left my position as a senior environmental policy advisor at a federal consulting firm when Lily was born. I had moved into a smaller apartment. I drove a Subaru Outback that was 4 years old. I brought a grocery store cake to Christmas. I was, by their accounting, a woman who had traded her potential for a baby and was quietly managing the consequences. Here's what they didn't know. I had left that position because I'd been recruited. 6 weeks after Lily was born, the Director of Environmental Strategy at Natural Resources Canada called me personally. She had tracked my work on a series of coastal remediation policy briefs I'd written 3 years earlier. She said they were the most practically workable frameworks her division had encountered in the decade. She offered me a contract position that let me work remotely, set my own hours around Lily's schedule, and paid more than anything I'd made before. I said yes. By the time Lily turned 2, I had moved from contract to permanent. By the time she turned 3, I was leading a cross-departmental working group on offshore energy transition policy. My work had been cited in briefings to the minister. I had spoken at a closed policy summit in Ottawa that didn't make the news because nothing that happens there is supposed to. My family had no idea. When they asked what I was doing, I said policy work, consulting, government stuff. My mother would nod with that particular expression that meant she was being polite about something she found underwhelming. My apartment was not small because I couldn't afford better. It was small because I had bought a house in a neighborhood with one of the best school districts in the province and I rented it out while I waited for Lily to be old enough to need it. My old Subaru was not a symptom of financial strain. I just liked it. I had a financial advisor, a registered education savings plan for Lily with $30,000 in it already, and a work pension that would make my mother's eyes water. I had stayed silent for 3 years because it was easier. Because I didn't want the conversation. Because the version of me they'd invented in their heads had nothing to do with my actual life, and correcting it felt like performing for people who had already walked out of the theater. But the post-it note changed something. Not because it hurt, though it did, but because I realized my silence had become a resource they were spending. The worse they assumed I was doing, the better it reflected on the choices they'd approved of. My brother's success, his prestigious fiancé, his society wedding, all of it looked brighter against the backdrop of a sister who was quietly struggling. I wasn't struggling, and they were about to find out. I opened my laptop and pulled up my contacts, found the name I was looking for, Dr. Isabelle Fontaine. She was the Deputy Minister of Natural Resources, my direct superior within the department, and the person who had recruited me 3 years ago. She was also the person who had, at a policy dinner 6 months earlier, leaned across the table and said, "Nora, the next time you need anything, you call me directly. I don't care what it is." I typed a short email. "Isabel, I know this is unusual. I have a personal event this weekend that I need to bring you up to speed on. I'd like to request your presence if you're available. There's a policy-adjacent development that makes it professionally relevant as well. I'll explain when I see you." She replied within the hour. "Tell me when and where." The wedding was at the Fairmont in downtown Vancouver. Black tie, 700 guests. I booked a room. For 3 days, I didn't think about my mother's note. I focused on Lily, on work, on the clean logistics of what I was about to do. I called a stylist I knew through a former colleague. She brought 4 gowns to the hotel room, and I chose a deep navy silk, floor-length, architectural, and quiet. Nothing that announced itself, just the kind of dress that reads as belonging before anyone's consciously noticed it. I did Lily's hair in 2 small braids and put her in a dark green velvet dress she'd chosen herself at a kid's boutique. She looked like a tiny dignitary. She was more excited about the hotel elevator than anything else. My brother Owen texted me the morning of the wedding. "Mom said you weren't coming. That's probably for the best. Steph's family is pretty traditional. Don't take it personally." I didn't reply. Isabel met me in the hotel lobby at 6:15. She had brought her husband, a quiet architect named Paul, and she was wearing a champagne column gown that made the room rearrange itself slightly when she walked in. She hugged me and bent down to Lily's level. "You must be the famous Lily," she said. Lily looked at her with enormous seriousness. "Your earrings are very shiny." "They are," Isabel agreed. "I wore them especially." The reception was held in the grand ballroom. My family's tables were in the East Wing. Owen and Stephanie had arranged it in clusters by social group, and I knew without checking that my assigned seat, if they'd assigned me one at all, would be somewhere in the back near the bar service station. I was not going to the East Wing. Isabel had made a call. We were seated at table 4, which was positioned in the direct center of the main floor, visible from every angle. It was the table where Stephanie's father, the member of provincial parliament, was seated, where his chief of staff was seated, where the editor of a national policy journal had been placed. We settled in. Lily immediately requested the bread rolls and asked Isabel's husband if he had ever stayed in a hotel before, which he found very funny. I ordered sparkling water and watched the room fill. At 7:40, the doors from the East Wing opened and the wedding party moved through the main floor to reach the photography area near the windows. They had to walk the length of the room. They had to walk the length of the room. They had to walk past table 4. I saw my mother first. She was in a floor-length silver gown, her hair set in a style she'd clearly had done professionally that afternoon. She was looking toward the windows, checking the photographer's positioning, and she didn't notice me until she was close enough that looking away would have required visible effort. She stopped walking. My father stepped up behind her and nearly walked into her back. "Nora." Her voice came out strange, thin and uncertain, like a word she'd suddenly forgotten how to pronounce. What are you doing here?" "I'm having dinner," I said. "You look beautiful, Mum." My father looked from me to the table, and I watched his face cycle through something I recognized as recalibration. He had noticed Isabel. He didn't know who she was yet, but he could read her room, and he understood that something about this table was significant. Owen was behind them, Stephanie at his side, and he stopped when he saw me. His expression was not happy. It was the expression of someone who has made a plan and is watching it develop a complication. "Nora," he said. "I thought you weren't." "Change of plans," I said. "Congratulations, by the way. You both look wonderful." Stephanie looked at me, then at Lily, who had a bread roll in each hand and was watching the proceedings with mild interest. Then Stephanie's gaze moved to Isabel, and something shifted in her face, a flicker of recognition. Stephanie's father had followed the group through the door. He was a tall man in his 60s with the composed affect of someone who spent a great deal of time in rooms where things were decided. He scanned the table as he approached, doing the same kind of rapid social calculation my father had just done, except he arrived at the answer faster. "Isabel," he said, extending his hand across me. "I didn't know you'd be here." "Nora invited me," Isabel said. "I rarely say no to Nora." There was a beat of silence in which several people at the table looked at me with new attention. "You know each other?" Owen said. Isabel looked at my brother with genuine warmth. "Nora leads the offshore energy transition working group for my department. She's been driving one of the most significant policy shifts in natural resources management this province has seen in 15 years. I try to make sure she knows she's valued." She paused. "Your family must be very proud." My mother said nothing. She was looking at me the way you look at something when you're trying to understand why you didn't see it before, like a figure in one of those visual puzzles where the image shifts and you can't go back to not knowing. My father cleared his throat. "We didn't, Nora never mentioned." "I know," I said, and I kept my voice even and light. "You never asked." There was a long, particular silence. Stephanie's father had been listening. He pulled out the chair beside me, his assigned seat, and sat down. "Miss Callahan," he said, using my last name like he'd already looked it up. "I've been hoping to put a face to your name. Your brief on tidal energy licensing came through my office last spring. My policy director called it the clearest regulatory framework she'd reviewed in a decade." Owen made a sound I didn't quite catch. "That's kind of her," I said. "I don't think she's exaggerating." He glanced at his son-in-law-to-be with an expression that was not unkind but was certainly not warm. Owen mentioned his sister worked in government. He didn't mention the scope of it. My mother finally found her voice. "Nora, why didn't you tell us? We had no idea you were doing all of this. We could have." "Been different?" I asked. The word landed where I meant it to. She flinched. My father looked at his shoes. "I hadn't planned a speech. I wasn't interested in a speech. I'd come here to live my life in the same room as the story they told about me, and let the contrast do what contrast does. But I had one more thing to do." I reached into my bag and took out the small folded paper I'd printed that afternoon. My brother saw it and went still. He knew what it was, or he would have, if he'd known that I'd been quietly reviewing the environmental compliance filings for his firm's new commercial development project in Squamish. It was the kind of review that falls under my department's mandate. And 3 days ago, going through the background materials my assistant had pulled for an unrelated file, I had found his company's name on a flagged contractor list. A drainage impact assessment that didn't match the site survey data. A consultant's signature on a document that post-dated the consultant's retirement by 11 months. Small things. The kind of things that disappear if nobody's paying attention, and become very large things when someone is. I hadn't done anything with it yet, I hadn't decided to, but I had it. I set the paper on the table in front of me face down. Owen's eyes went to it and stayed there. "I'd like to talk to you about the Squamish project," I said. "Not tonight, but soon. I flagged some inconsistencies in the compliance documentation that will need to be addressed before the January submission deadline." I paused. "I wanted you to know that directly, from me. I thought that was fairer than the alternative." Owen's jaw tightened. "What are you saying?" I'm saying your compliance team needs to take another look at the drainage assessment before it goes to formal review. I'm saying it as your sister, not as a departmental officer. That's the only version of this conversation where you have options. The table had gone quiet in that specific way that happens when everyone present understands that something real is happening. Stephanie looked at Owen. Owen looked at me. My mother looked at her hands. Stephanie's father picked up his wine glass and looked out toward the dance floor. Good advice, he said neutrally. I'd take it. I folded the paper and put it back in my bag. I was not going to file it tonight. I was not going to file it unless I had to. But Owen didn't need to know that. And more importantly, he now understood that his quiet, struggling, single mother sister was the person standing between him and a regulatory problem that would be very expensive to resolve publicly. The wedding party moved on. The photographer called everyone together. The toasts happened, and they were lovely, and Lily fell asleep in my lap halfway through dinner with a bread roll still loosely clasped in one hand. My mother came to find me near the end of the evening. She sat down across from me at the now mostly empty table 4, in the chair where Isabel's husband had been sitting. She didn't say anything for a moment. She just looked at Lily sleeping. She looks like you did, my mother finally said. At that age? I know, I said. Nora, she stopped, tried again. We didn't know. I understand that. We should have asked more questions. Her voice had lost its managed quality. It sounded like what it actually was, an older woman sitting in a ballroom realizing she had made a long series of small errors that had compounded into something that couldn't be quietly corrected. We made assumptions. You did, I said. I wasn't cold about it, I was just honest. You decided what my life looked like before you looked at it. And you kept deciding every time I showed up. She pressed her lips together. Her eyes were wet in the way of someone who is trying not to make a scene at a wedding. I don't know how to fix it, she said. I know you don't, I said. That's okay. I'm not waiting for you to. I meant it. Not as a punishment. I was past the stage where her opinion of my life had operational consequences. I had built something real and specific in mine, and she hadn't been part of it, but that didn't make it less real. It just meant she had missed it. I shifted Lily gently to get my wrap from the chair beside me. She stirred but didn't wake. She's wonderful, my mother said quietly, looking at her granddaughter. And for the first time all evening, I believed my mother completely. She really is, I said. I said goodbye to Isabel and Paul at the lobby. Isabel hugged me and told me she'd see me Thursday for the working group debrief. Paul said that Lily had been the best part of the evening and he was not wrong. I carried Lily up to our hotel room. She woke up just enough in the elevator to ask if we could have the breakfast buffet in the morning. I said yes. She went back to sleep before we reached our floor. I laid her in the big white hotel bed and stood at the window for a few minutes, looking out at the city lights spreading across the water toward the North Shore Mountains. My phone had messages. My brother had texted twice. My mother once. I didn't open them. I had one more thing to do. I pulled up the family group chat, the one called Sunday Dinners with the old photo of Christmas 2 years ago where I was slightly out of frame at the edge, holding Lily, half cut off by whoever had taken the picture. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I opened the settings, left the group, watched the thread close. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even relief, exactly. It was more like finishing a task that had been sitting at the bottom of the list for too long. The quiet satisfaction of clearing the thing that had been taking up space. I set my phone face down on the nightstand. The room was warm and quiet. Lily was breathing in small even sounds in the big white bed, her braids slightly unwound, one sock off for reasons I would probably never understand. I had spent 3 years being the version of myself I needed to be on my own terms, not to prove something to them, not waiting for the moment when they'd finally see it. I had just been doing the work, raising my daughter, building a life that felt true. The room my family had always held open for the diminished version of me, the edited one, the cropped one, had been getting smaller and smaller as my actual life kept getting bigger. Tonight I had just let both things exist in the same place at the same time. That was all. That was enough. In the morning, Lily ate 3 plates at the buffet and told the server that the orange juice was very advanced. I drank my coffee and watched the fog lift off the harbor and thought about the working group debrief on Thursday and what Lily was going to want to be for Halloween in 3 weeks and whether the tenant in my house had remembered to schedule the furnace inspection before the weather turned. My life was full of good and specific things. The best decision I ever made was to stop explaining it to people who had decided not to see it, not with a confrontation, not with a reveal, just by keeping going, quietly and consistently until the truth of it was too large to be talked around. Sometimes the people who underestimate you the longest are the ones who need the most time to catch up, and sometimes by the time they do, you've already stopped waiting at the door. There's a specific kind of quiet that settles over you when you stop needing someone to finally get it. I remember standing at that hotel window after everyone had gone, looking out at the harbor lights and realizing I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt clear. The way you feel after finishing something that's been sitting unfinished for too long. What I kept coming back to was this: my family's assumptions about me had never actually slowed me down. They'd only hurt in the moments I'd let them in. Every time I nodded through a comment about my little government job, every time I let my mother redirect the conversation to Owen's firm or Tiffany's Instagram milestones, I'd been choosing to protect them from a truth they hadn't earned yet. That choice was mine. And so was the moment I stopped making it. I think about Lily a lot when I think about what this whole chapter of my life has meant. She was sitting at that table eating bread rolls, completely unbothered, while the room rearranged itself around her mother. She didn't know what was happening. She just knew her mom was there and that the orange juice was, in her words, very advanced. That's the thing about children. They measure the world by entirely different coordinates. She wasn't impressed by the deputy minister's title or Stephanie's father's position. She was impressed by shiny earrings and a breakfast buffet. And watching her, I kept thinking, that's the version of judgment I want to keep. Clear eyes, no performance, just what's actually in front of you. The hardest thing I've ever done wasn't building a career while raising a child alone. It was doing it without anyone in my family knowing. Without the validation that would have made it feel real in a different way. There were nights when I genuinely questioned whether silence was integrity or just avoidance, whether staying quiet was a form of dignity or a form of cowardice. I still don't have a clean answer to that. What I do know is that the work I was doing was real whether or not anyone witnessed it. That's the thing about building something true. It doesn't require an audience to exist. I gave Owen a way out with the compliance issue because that was the right thing to do. Not because I owed it to him, but because I'm not interested in destruction. There's a difference between accountability and cruelty, and I've always believed that how you treat people when you have power over them is the most honest version of who you are. I had the leverage. I chose not to use it as a weapon. I don't think that made me weak. I think it made me someone Lily can grow up watching without learning the wrong things about how strength works. What happened at that wedding wasn't really about proving anything. It was just about occupying my actual life at full size, in the same room as the story they'd told about me, and letting the truth speak at its own volume. I didn't have to raise my voice. I didn't have to explain myself. I just had to show up as exactly who I already was. That's all any of us can really do. Build the thing carefully, protect the people who matter, keep your integrity intact through the hard years, and trust that eventually the distance between who you are and who people think you are will close on its own. You don't have to force it, you just have to keep going.